The cruelest kind of betrayal is the one delivered with a smile under crystal lights. The ballroom shimmered like a scene from an old Hollywood dream, drenched in gold light, and the soft melody of a live jazz quartet tucked beneath the sweeping marble staircase of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. Servers moved gracefully between Manhattan's elite, carrying silver trays of champagne, while camera flashes burst like tiny stars across the room. Naomi Carter stood near the entrance, one elegant hand resting lightly against the satin fabric at her waist as she took in the celebration unfolding around her. Tonight marked the 15th anniversary of Whitmore Holdings, the billion-dollar empire her husband had built from ruthless ambition and relentless precision. But for Naomi, it was supposed to mean something more personal. Ethan had told her this gala would also celebrate them, their marriage, their story, their future. She still remembered his exact words from 3 nights ago, spoken quietly while adjusting the diamond bracelet around her wrist. "Wear black satin," he had murmured against her temple. "You look unforgettable in black." Now the gown wrapped around her like liquid midnight, smooth and sculpted with timeless elegance. The neckline revealed nothing excessive, only grace. Her natural curls cascaded softly over one shoulder, and the diamonds resting against her brown skin caught the chandelier light every time she moved. She looked exactly like the woman Ethan Whitmore once swore he would spend his entire life protecting. Yet something inside her felt strangely unsettled. Tiny details had been whispering warnings for months. The late-night meetings, the sudden business trips, the way Ethan's smile had become rehearsed instead of warm. Even now, as Naomi scanned the ballroom filled with senators, CEOs, investors, and socialites, she noticed how many people avoided holding eye contact with her for too long. Their expressions carried something uncomfortable beneath their polished smiles. Pity. The realization brushed against her spine like cold silk. Naomi reached for a champagne flute from a passing tray, just as the ballroom lights dimmed slightly near the grand staircase. A wave of attention swept across the room. Ethan had arrived. The familiar power of his presence changed the atmosphere instantly. At 6'3", dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, Ethan Whitmore carried the kind of quiet authority that made conversations stop without effort. His silver cufflinks reflected the chandeliers overhead as he descended the staircase with controlled confidence. For a brief second, Naomi smiled softly to herself. Even after 10 years of marriage, part of her still remembered the man who once danced barefoot with her in a tiny Brooklyn apartment before the billions and headlines and private jets changed everything around them. But then she saw the woman beside him, tall, blonde, wrapped in a shimmering ivory gown that clung to her like candlelight. Vanessa Sinclair. Naomi had seen her before in magazines and charity events, always lingering somewhere near Ethan's orbit over the past year. But tonight was different. Tonight Vanessa's hand rested possessively around Ethan's arm as though she belonged there, as though she had every right to stand beside him. The jazz music continued softly in the background, but Naomi could no longer hear it clearly. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass, while the room seemed to narrow inch by inch. Ethan reached the center of the ballroom floor beneath the enormous crystal chandelier and accepted a microphone from the event host. The entire room turned toward him with admiration. Ethan smiled. Calm, controlled, beautifully rehearsed. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began smoothly. "Whitmore Holdings would not be where it is today without loyalty, vision, and the courage to embrace the future." Applause followed politely. Naomi's heartbeat slowed into something unnaturally still. Then Ethan turned toward Vanessa and smiled at her the way he used to smile at Naomi. "There's someone very special I'd like all of you to properly meet tonight," he said. Vanessa's polished lips curved delicately as cameras immediately lifted across the ballroom. Ethan rested his hand against the small of Vanessa's back. "My wife, Vanessa." The ballroom did not gasp. It simply stopped breathing. For one suspended second, Naomi Carter could hear nothing except the faint crack forming somewhere deep inside her chest. The ballroom remained frozen beneath rivers of crystal light, while camera flashes slowly lowered one by one, uncertainty spreading across the faces of Manhattan's elite like smoke. Ethan Whitmore stood perfectly composed at the center of the room, one hand resting against Vanessa Sinclair's waist as though the sentence he had just spoken belonged in ordinary conversation instead of destroying a decade of marriage in front of 500 people. Naomi did not move immediately. That was the part people remembered later. Not tears, not screaming. Silence. Beautiful, devastating silence. Her champagne glass trembled softly between her fingers, the pale gold liquid catching the chandelier light, while whispers began rising carefully around the edges of the ballroom. Some guests stared openly. Others looked away in embarrassment. A senator's wife covered her mouth with gloved fingers while two investors near the orchestra exchanged uncomfortable glances. Everyone in that room understood exactly what had happened. Ethan had not simply humiliated his wife. He had erased her publicly. Vanessa's expression carried the polished calm of a woman who had rehearsed this moment many times in her imagination. Her ivory gown shimmered beneath the ballroom lights, elegant and expensive, chosen carefully to symbolize arrival. Naomi noticed all of it with terrifying clarity. The diamonds around Vanessa's neck, the confidence in her posture, the satisfaction hidden beneath her practiced smile. Ethan finally looked toward Naomi directly, and for the first time that evening something uncertain flickered behind his gray eyes. Perhaps he expected tears, perhaps anger, maybe even collapse. Instead, Naomi placed her champagne flute carefully onto a silver tray beside her. The tiny sound of crystal touching silver echoed strangely loud in the silent ballroom. Then she began walking toward him. Every heel strike against the marble floor landed with calm precision. Slow, measured, controlled. The crowd parted instinctively for her, like water separating around stone. Naomi's black satin gown moved elegantly with each step, and under the golden chandeliers she no longer looked like a discarded wife. She looked untouchable. Ethan straightened slightly as she approached. Vanessa's smile faded by the smallest fraction. Naomi stopped directly in front of them beneath the enormous crystal chandelier that had witnessed countless charity galas, political victories, and billion-dollar negotiations over the years. Yet somehow the room had never felt this quiet before. Naomi lifted her left hand slowly. The massive emerald-cut wedding ring Ethan once slid onto her finger in Lake Como glimmered beneath the ballroom lights. 10 years of loyalty rested inside that single piece of jewelry. 10 years of believing love could survive power. Her fingers curled delicately around the ring before she removed it with graceful precision. No shaking, no hesitation. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Naomi reached for the champagne glass resting near his hand and balanced the ring carefully against the crystal rim. Cling. The sound cut through the ballroom sharper than any scream could have. Somewhere near the orchestra, a woman quietly inhaled. Naomi finally spoke, her voice soft enough that the room leaned forward to hear it. Then you should have introduced her sooner. Ethan blinked as though the sentence struck harder than expected. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him for the first time all evening. Naomi looked neither angry nor broken. That was what unsettled everyone most. Her face remained composed beneath the chandelier light, but something inside her eyes had changed forever. The warmth Ethan once depended on was gone. In its place stood something colder, stronger, final. Naomi stepped back slowly, smoothing one hand along the black satin at her waist. Congratulations on your future, Ethan, she said quietly. I hope it brings you everything you were willing to destroy for it. Then she turned away from him without waiting for a response. The ballroom remained completely silent as Naomi Carter walked across the marble floor alone, every eye following the woman Ethan Whitmore had just underestimated in front of the entire city. The cold October air wrapped around Naomi Carter the moment the hotel doors closed behind her, but somehow it felt easier to breathe outside the ballroom than inside it. Manhattan glittered around her in rivers of white headlights and golden windows stretching endlessly into the night, beautiful and indifferent to human heartbreak. Across the street, photographers were already gathering near the entrance ropes, sensing scandal the way sharks sensed blood beneath dark water. Naomi kept walking. Her black satin gown moved elegantly against the sidewalk while the sound of distant traffic mixed with the pounding of her heartbeat. Behind her, somewhere high above the city inside the Whitmore Grand Ballroom, Ethan was probably still standing beneath crystal chandeliers pretending everything remained under control. That thought should have shattered her. Instead, it left only exhaustion. A Blacktown car pulled forward toward the curb. Samuel, the Whitmore family driver for nearly 12 years, stepped out quickly and opened the rear door with visible concern written across his aging face. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly before stopping himself, uncertainty flickering in his expression. Naomi offered him a small smile that somehow looked more painful than tears. "It is all right, Samuel," she whispered. "You do not have to call me that anymore." His eyes lowered immediately. "Where would you like me to take you?" For several seconds, Naomi simply stared through the city lights reflecting across the wet pavement. Home. The word no longer meant anything. The penthouse Ethan bought overlooking Central Park suddenly felt like a museum built around lies. Every room carried memories she could no longer trust. The kitchen where they danced at midnight while eating takeout Chinese food straight from cartons during their early years. The balcony where Ethan once wrapped cashmere blankets around her shoulders while snow fell over Manhattan. The library where he promised they would grow old together. She realized with terrifying clarity that betrayal did not destroy memories. It poisoned them. "The Pierre Hotel," Naomi answered quietly. Samuel hesitated. "Of course." The ride uptown unfolded in silence except for the soft hum of tires against rain-darkened streets. Naomi sat beside the window watching New York blur into streaks of gold and silver. Her reflection floated faintly against the glass. Perfect makeup, diamond earrings, gracefully composed posture. She still looked like Ethan Whitmore's wife. Yet inside, something fundamental had already disappeared forever. Her phone began vibrating nonstop inside her clutch purse. Messages flooded the screen faster than she could process them. Society wives pretending concern. Reporters requesting statements. Business executives asking if the rumors were true. One headline had already appeared online before the gala even ended. Whitmore CEO introduces new wife at anniversary event. Naomi stared at the words until they blurred. Then another message appeared. Ethan. Just her name. Naomi. She looked at it for several silent seconds before locking the screen without responding. Samuel glanced carefully through the rearview mirror. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "No, because there was no one to call anymore." Her mother had passed 3 winters earlier after a quiet battle with cancer. Most of the friendships Naomi once trusted had gradually transformed into social alliances connected to Ethan's empire. Somewhere along the way, she had become more symbol than person. The elegant wife, the graceful hostess, the beautiful woman standing beside the billionaire in magazine photographs. And tonight he had erased her with a single sentence. The car finally stopped beneath the glowing entrance of the Pierre. Bellmen rushed forward beneath gold awnings while soft piano music drifted through the revolving doors. Naomi reached for the diamond bracelet Ethan had given her on their 8th anniversary and removed it slowly from her wrist. Then the earrings. One by one, pieces of the life she thought she owned disappeared into her clutch purse like tiny funerals. Samuel stepped out to open her door, but Naomi paused before exiting. "Samuel?" "Yes, ma'am." She swallowed carefully before speaking. "Did everyone know?" The older man's silence answered before his words ever could. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as something inside her finally broke without making a sound. Then she stepped out of the car alone, carrying herself with the kind of dignity that only exists after the heart has already learned how to survive devastation. By sunrise, Manhattan had already turned Naomi Carter's humiliation into entertainment. The television mounted silently inside her suite at the Pierre flashed endless headlines beneath cheerful morning anchors discussing betrayal as though it were quarterly stock performance. Socialite shock at Whitmore Gala. Billionaire CEO debuts new partner. Who was Vanessa Sinclair? Naomi stood barefoot beside the floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped in a cream silk robe, staring down at the city 30 stories below, while early October rain painted silver streaks across the glass. She had not slept. The black satin gown from the gala still rested across the velvet chaise near the fireplace exactly where she dropped it hours earlier, looking less like fashion now and more like evidence from another woman's life. Her phone vibrated constantly on the marble counter beside untouched coffee. Lawyers, publicists, investors, sympathy disguised as curiosity. Naomi ignored every call. At 8:14 in the morning, a soft knock sounded at the suite door. She opened it to find Claire Bennett standing quietly in the hallway holding 2 paper coffee cups and wearing oversized sunglasses despite the rain outside. Naomi almost collapsed at the sight of her younger sister. Claire was one of the few people left in her life untouched by Manhattan's social machinery. A pediatric nurse from Brooklyn with natural curls always escaping her ponytail and a habit of speaking truth without decoration. Claire looked at Naomi for exactly 2 seconds before pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Oh, Naomi," she whispered softly. "I saw everything." For the first time since the ballroom, Naomi's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for pain to slip through the edges. They sat together near the windows while the city blurred beneath gray skies. Claire remained silent for a long time, allowing Naomi space to breathe around devastation. Finally, Naomi spoke without looking up from the untouched coffee warming her hands. "Did I really become that easy to replace?" Claire's expression tightened immediately. "No," Naomi gave a hollow laugh. "Everyone knew except me." "That says something about them," Claire replied carefully. "Not you." But Naomi was no longer certain where blame ended and truth began. Looking back now, the signs felt unbearable in their clarity. Ethan canceling vacations at the last minute. His sudden obsession with privacy. The way he stopped reaching for her hand during events. She remembered standing alone at charity galas while Vanessa somehow always appeared nearby, glowing beneath camera flashes like a woman slowly rehearsing for a role she intended to steal. "I kept making excuses for him," Naomi admitted quietly. "Because I loved him." Outside, rain drifted steadily over Fifth Avenue while black umbrellas moved like shadows beneath the city skyline. Claire leaned forward gently. "What are you going to do now?" Naomi looked toward the black satin gown across the room. Last night, she would have answered differently. Last night, she still believed survival meant saving her marriage. But sometime between Ethan introducing another woman as his wife and Samuel silently confirming everyone already knew, something irreversible had happened inside her. "I am leaving Manhattan," Naomi said softly. Claire blinked in surprise. "For how long?" Naomi turned toward the rain-covered windows again. "Long enough to remember who I was before I became Ethan Whitmore's reflection." The words settled heavily between them. A knock interrupted the silence again an hour later. This time, it was hotel staff delivering an enormous arrangement of white roses tied with silver ribbon. Ethan's favorite flowers. Naomi stared at them for several silent seconds before noticing the envelope tucked carefully between the stems. Her name written in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. Claire watched cautiously as Naomi opened it. Inside was only one sentence. "We need to talk before this gets worse." Naomi read the words twice before smiling faintly to herself, though there was no warmth left in it anymore. Worse, as though public humiliation beneath crystal chandeliers had simply been an unfortunate misunderstanding requiring damage control. Slowly, Naomi closed the card and placed it back among the roses. Then she stood, walked to the hotel phone, and requested the earliest available flight to Paris. Because somewhere beneath heartbreak and betrayal, another version of Naomi Carter had already begun waking up, and she no longer intended to ask permission to exist. Paris greeted Naomi Carter with rain and anonymity. Two things she desperately needed. The city moved differently from Manhattan. Slower, softer, less interested in spectacle. 3 weeks after the ballroom scandal exploded across every major entertainment outlet in America, Naomi stood beneath the gray November sky, outside a small luxury skincare laboratory tucked quietly along Rue de Lille, her camel wool coat pulled tightly against the cold while golden leaves swirled along the sidewalk around her heels. No reporters waited outside. No flashing cameras followed her movements. Here, she was not Ethan Whitmore's disgraced wife. She was simply a woman trying to breathe again. The laboratory belonged to Celeste Laurent, a French beauty entrepreneur Naomi had met years earlier during a charity event in Milan. Unlike most people in high society, Celeste never treated Naomi like decoration standing beside a billionaire. She treated her like a mind worth listening to. "Pain changes women," Celeste said softly that morning while guiding Naomi through rows of glass shelves lined with botanical oils and creams glowing amber beneath warm lighting. "Some become bitter. Others become brilliant." Naomi ran her fingers lightly along the smooth marble counter, absorbing the calming scent of lavender and sandalwood drifting through the laboratory air. "And which one did you become?" she asked quietly. Celeste smiled faintly. "That depends who is telling the story." Outside the windows, Paris shimmered beneath steady rain, while Naomi slowly began building a routine from the ruins of her old life. Mornings became quiet walks along the Seine wrapped in scarves and silence. Afternoons disappeared inside laboratories and meetings where women discussed formulas, branding, sustainability, and elegance with the kind of seriousness Naomi had once reserved only for Ethan's corporate world. At night, she returned to a modest suite overlooking a narrow cobblestone street, where jazz music drifted softly from nearby cafes long after midnight. The loneliness still existed. Some nights it arrived suddenly, while brushing her hair before bed or reaching instinctively for a phone call that no longer belonged to her life. Other times it appeared through memories she never invited back. Ethan laughing while teaching her how to ski in Aspen. Ethan kissing her forehead during long flights home from London. Ethan promising she would never have to face the world alone. Those memories no longer shattered Naomi the way they once had. They simply reminded her that love without respect eventually becomes grief wearing expensive clothes. One snowy afternoon in December, Naomi sat alone inside a quiet cafe near Place Vendôme reviewing market research for luxury skincare products designed specifically for women with deeper skin tones. The industry remained painfully limited despite billions in annual revenue. Most luxury brands still treated women like Naomi as afterthoughts rather than inspiration. As she studied the numbers spread across her table beside untouched espresso, something unfamiliar stirred quietly inside her. Purpose. Real purpose. Not charity galas attached to Ethan's reputation. Not social appearances designed to strengthen someone else's empire. Her own vision. Her own voice. Her own name. Naomi closed the folder slowly and stared out the cafe window at snow collecting gently along the Paris sidewalks. For the first time in months, she did not feel abandoned. She felt awake. Weeks later, she signed the first investment agreement for what would eventually become Noir Elegance, a luxury skincare company focused on sophistication, inclusivity, and timeless beauty for women too often ignored by elite brands. The investors believed in her immediately, not because of Ethan Whitmore, because Naomi spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had survived public destruction and chosen grace instead of collapse. Meanwhile, back in Manhattan, gossip columns continued reducing her story into headlines beside photographs of Vanessa Sinclair draped across charity events and yacht parties beside Ethan. Naomi stopped reading them entirely after New Year's Day. Some chapters no longer deserved access to her peace. One icy evening in late January, Naomi stood before the mirror in her Paris suite applying deep red lipstick before a private investor dinner. The woman staring back at her looked different now. Stronger around the eyes. Sharper somehow. The softness remained, but it no longer apologized for existing. Naomi touched the edge of the mirror lightly before turning away. Ethan Whitmore thought he had erased her beneath crystal chandeliers and public humiliation. What he never understood was this. Women like Naomi Carter do not disappear. They rebuild until the world is forced to see them differently. 3 years later, the world no longer whispered Naomi Carter's name with pity. It spoke it with admiration. The cover of Forbes rested elegantly beneath the soft morning light inside a private lounge at Milan Fashion Week, the headline printed in bold silver letters across Naomi's photograph. The woman who turned pain into power. She stared at the magazine for only a moment before setting it aside beside untouched espresso. Fame no longer thrilled her the way social approval once had. Success had become quieter now, more personal. Across the room, assistants moved carefully between garment racks while luxury investors and fashion executives gathered for Noir Elegance's newest international launch. The company had expanded far beyond skincare. What began inside a modest Paris laboratory now stood as one of the fastest-growing luxury beauty brands in Europe and North America, celebrated for elegance, inclusivity, and timeless sophistication. Women lined up outside flagship stores in Paris, Chicago, Los Angeles, and London. Beauty editors called the brand revolutionary. Naomi simply called it honest. She had built every formula, every campaign, and every message around one truth she understood intimately. Women deserved to feel seen before they felt sold to. 5 minutes until the presentation, her assistant Sophia reminded gently while adjusting the sleeve of Naomi's cream-tailored blazer. Naomi nodded once before glancing toward the giant digital screen displaying the Noir Elegance campaign across the ballroom wall. A black woman stood confidently beneath golden lighting wearing crimson lipstick and a calm expression untouched by apology. The campaign slogan glowed beneath her image. Elegance is not given. It is claimed. Naomi looked away quietly. Somewhere deep inside herself, she knew those words had never truly been about beauty products. On the other side of the Atlantic, Ethan Whitmore sat alone inside his Manhattan office watching the same Forbes interview replay silently across a financial news network. Rain tapped steadily against the towering windows of Whitmore Holdings while Naomi's voice filled the captions beneath the screen. Rebuilding your life requires accepting that some endings are not punishment. They are permission. Ethan loosened his tie slowly without taking his eyes off her image. 3 years had changed Naomi in ways he still struggled to understand. The softness remained, but now it existed beside something impossible to control. Presence, confidence, power. She no longer looked like a woman standing beside someone else's empire. She looked like the empire itself. A quiet knock interrupted the office silence before Vanessa entered carrying shopping bags from Madison Avenue boutiques, and the sharp floral perfume Ethan had once found exciting but now barely noticed. "You are still watching her interviews?" she asked lightly, though irritation flickered beneath her polished smile. Ethan muted the television immediately. It was on already. Vanessa set the bags down harder than necessary. "You know people are talking again." Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. People always talk. But he knew exactly what she meant. Over the past year, comparisons between Vanessa and Naomi had become unavoidable in social circles. Vanessa remained glamorous and visible, but Naomi had become respected. There was a difference Manhattan understood immediately. Respect lasted longer. Vanessa crossed her arms carefully. She is turning herself into some kind of saint because of what happened. Ethan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "No," he replied quietly. "She is turning herself into something bigger than what happened." The silence between them sharpened instantly. Vanessa looked away first. Later that evening, Ethan stood alone inside the penthouse overlooking Central Park, whiskey untouched beside him while city lights flickered endlessly below. The apartment felt colder now despite its luxury. Larger somehow. Empty in ways expensive furniture could not fix. Naomi's favorite books no longer rested beside the fireplace. Her piano remained untouched for years. Even the air felt unfamiliar without the vanilla and jasmine perfume she used to wear on winter nights. Ethan closed his eyes briefly as memory struck without warning. Naomi laughing barefoot in the kitchen while rain hit the balcony windows. Naomi asleep against his shoulder during late flights home from Europe. Naomi standing beneath crystal chandeliers in black satin looking at him with heartbreak she refused to display publicly. He had mistaken her grace for weakness. That realization haunted him more than the scandal ever did. His phone buzzed softly against the marble counter. A charity foundation director confirming attendance for the upcoming Whitmore Royal Gala next month. Manhattan's largest philanthropic event of the year. Ethan glanced at the guest list attached below the message. Then his breathing stopped for one suspended second. Guest of honor. Naomi Carter. The Whitmore Royal Gala had always been designed to impress people who were impossible to impress. Crystal chandeliers floated above the grand ballroom like suspended constellations, while a 60-piece orchestra played softly beneath ceilings painted in gold leaf and ivory. Politicians, billionaires, fashion executives, and media royalty filled the marble hall wrapped in diamonds and perfectly rehearsed smiles. Yet beneath the glamour, tension moved quietly through the room tonight like electricity before a storm. Everyone knew Naomi Carter was coming back. And everyone wanted to witness what happened when the woman Ethan Whitmore publicly erased returned stronger than ever. Ethan stood near the ballroom staircase dressed in an immaculate midnight tuxedo, one hand resting loosely around a crystal whiskey glass, while photographers captured endless flashes around him. Beside him, Vanessa Sinclair adjusted the diamond bracelet glittering against her wrist, though her polished composure had begun cracking long before the evening even started. "You are staring at the entrance again," she murmured tightly. Ethan did not answer immediately, because she was right. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted back toward the ballroom doors without permission. 3 years. 3 years since Naomi walked away beneath those chandeliers with heartbreak hidden behind impossible grace. 3 years since he convinced himself she would eventually fade into memory, while his life continued uninterrupted. Instead, she became impossible to escape. Her interviews, her magazine covers, her empire, her voice. Every success felt like a mirror reflecting exactly what he lost. Suddenly, the orchestra softened. Conversations slowed. Heads turned instinctively toward the entrance. Then the ballroom doors opened. Naomi Carter stepped inside wearing crimson silk. Not bright red. Not loud. Deep crimson like velvet wine beneath candlelight. The gown flowed elegantly against her figure with quiet sophistication, its silhouette timeless rather than dramatic. Diamond earrings shimmered softly beneath her dark curls, while matching crimson lipstick framed the calm expression that once belonged only to wounded women and now belonged to powerful ones. For one suspended moment, the ballroom became completely silent. Ethan forgot how to breathe. Naomi moved slowly through the crowd with the kind of confidence that did not ask for attention because it naturally commanded it. Every camera in the room turned toward her instantly. Men who once ignored her now straightened their posture when she passed. Women watched with admiration rather than pity. She no longer looked like someone recovering from humiliation. She looked like someone entirely beyond it. Vanessa's fingers tightened sharply around her champagne flute. Of course she had to make an entrance, she whispered under her breath. Ethan barely heard her, because Naomi had just looked in his direction for the first time in 3 years. And she did not break. That realization struck harder than anything else. There was no visible pain left inside her eyes. No desperation. No longing. Only calm acknowledgement, as though Ethan Whitmore now belonged to a distant chapter she had already survived reading. Naomi approached the center of the ballroom, where Foundation executives immediately greeted her with admiration. "Ms. Carter, it is an honor to finally meet you in person," one investor said warmly. "Your scholarship initiative in Paris changed hundreds of young women's lives." Naomi smiled graciously. "That means more to me than any award tonight." Ethan watched the interaction quietly while something unfamiliar twisted painfully beneath his ribs. Pride, regret, loss, perhaps all three at once. Because Naomi was glowing in ways wealth alone could never create. Nearby, whispers traveled rapidly between guests. "She looks incredible. Did you see the Forbes feature? Vanessa cannot compete with that kind of class." Vanessa heard every word. Her polished smile began hardening around the edges while insecurity flickered openly beneath her expression for the first time all evening. Naomi eventually turned toward the staircase leading up to the ballroom stage, where she would later receive the Humanitarian Excellence Award. As she passed Ethan, the distance between them narrowed to less than 2 feet. The familiar scent of vanilla and jasmine drifted softly through the air between them, instantly dragging Ethan backward through years of memory. Naomi paused briefly beside him, just long enough for silence to sharpen. Ethan's voice lowered almost to a whisper. "You look—" He stopped because no word felt large enough. Naomi met his eyes calmly beneath the chandelier light. "Alive," she offered softly. Ethan swallowed hard. Naomi gave him the smallest, saddest smile imaginable before continuing toward the staircase alone while the ballroom watched her like history correcting itself in real time. The ballroom had begun breathing again, but differently now. Not with excitement. With tension. Naomi Carter stood near the grand staircase surrounded by Foundation directors, international investors, and reporters eager for even a single word from the woman who transformed public heartbreak into a global empire. Crystal chandeliers reflected against the crimson silk of her gown, while camera flashes illuminated her calm expression like lightning trapped beneath gold ceilings. Across the room, Vanessa Sinclair felt herself disappearing in real time. It happened slowly at first. A famous editor from Vogue excused herself mid-conversation with Vanessa to greet Naomi personally. 2 investors who once competed for Vanessa's attention drifted toward the staircase instead. Even the photographers stopped calling Vanessa's name. The spotlight had moved, and everyone in the ballroom knew it. Vanessa forced another polished smile, while sipping champagne she no longer tasted. "They are acting like she cured world hunger," she muttered sharply beneath her breath. Ethan remained silent beside her. His eyes never left Naomi. That unsettled Vanessa more than anything else. Because for the first time since she entered Ethan Whitmore's life, she understood a terrifying truth. She had won the man, but Naomi had become unforgettable. Near the ballroom stage, Naomi spoke gracefully with an elderly donor about educational initiatives for young women in underserved communities when her assistant Sophia approached quietly, holding a tablet. "Naomi," she whispered carefully, "you may want to see this." Naomi accepted the device calmly. Across the glowing screen flashed breaking financial headlines from multiple business outlets. Investigation launched into Sinclair Foundation charity funds. Questions rise over missing donations. Naomi's eyes moved steadily across the article without visible reaction. According to preliminary reports, several luxury expenses connected to Vanessa's private accounts had allegedly been paid through foundation money intended for children's hospitals and scholarship programs. Private flights, designer purchases, international resort stays disguised as charity operations. Naomi slowly lowered the tablet. Around the ballroom, whispers had already started spreading faster than music. Vanessa noticed immediately. Guests began glancing toward her with subtle discomfort instead of admiration. Conversations shifted the moment she approached. One board member quietly stepped away altogether. "What is happening?" Vanessa demanded under her breath while checking her own phone. Then her expression changed completely. Color drained from her face beneath the ballroom lights as headlines exploded across every major financial network simultaneously. Ethan finally turned toward her sharply. "Tell me this is not true." Vanessa's composure cracked instantly. "It is being exaggerated," she replied too quickly. "Everyone manipulates expenses in these organizations." Ethan stared at her with growing disbelief. "Did you steal charity money?" "Do not say it like that," Vanessa hissed quietly. "You have no idea how much pressure I have been under these past few years." Ethan stepped back slightly as though suddenly seeing her clearly for the first time. And perhaps he was. Because once the glamour peeled away, Vanessa no longer looked sophisticated or magnetic beneath the chandeliers. She looked frightened, small, desperate to remain important. Across the ballroom, Naomi lifted her gaze briefly toward Ethan. Their eyes met for one suspended second. Ethan remembered another ballroom years earlier. Another woman standing beneath crystal lights while he publicly destroyed her dignity for someone he believed was more exciting, more glamorous, more worthy of his future. God, how wrong he had been. Naomi never needed attention to possess power. Vanessa depended on attention to survive. The realization landed inside Ethan with brutal clarity. Vanessa reached for his arm anxiously. "Ethan, say something." But Ethan slowly removed her hand from his sleeve. Not cruelly, just finally. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief as whispers swelled louder around them. A reporter near the back of the ballroom had already begun broadcasting live updates while Foundation executives exchanged alarmed expressions beneath the chandeliers. The social empire Vanessa spent years building was collapsing in front of 500 witnesses. Yet Naomi did not smile. She did not celebrate. That was the difference between revenge and dignity. Naomi simply watched quietly from across the ballroom with sad understanding in her eyes, as though life itself had already delivered every consequence necessary. Ethan looked toward her again, while regret settled heavily through his chest like winter snow. He had once believed power came from controlling rooms, headlines, and people. Naomi had taught him otherwise without even trying. Real power was walking through humiliation without losing your grace. And he had destroyed the only woman who ever possessed it naturally. By the end of the evening, the ballroom looked different than it had only hours earlier. The crystal chandeliers still glowed above marble floors polished to perfection. The orchestra still played softly beneath the golden ceilings. Champagne still shimmered inside delicate crystal glasses. Yet something invisible had shifted permanently inside the room. 3 years ago, Naomi Carter walked out of this world carrying humiliation wrapped in black satin and silence. Tonight, she stood at the center of it, transformed into something no one could ignore. The foundation director stepped onto the ballroom stage and adjusted the microphone carefully while guests slowly returned to their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced warmly, "it is my honor to present this year's Humanitarian Excellence Award to a woman whose work has impacted thousands of lives across the world. A visionary entrepreneur, a champion for women, Ms. Naomi Carter." The ballroom erupted into applause so powerful it seemed to vibrate through the chandeliers themselves. Naomi rose gracefully from her table near the staircase, while crimson silk flowed elegantly around her heels. Camera flashes burst endlessly as she made her way toward the stage, but unlike years before, she no longer appeared overwhelmed by attention. She carried herself with calm certainty now, as though she finally understood that worth was never something another person could grant or remove. Ethan Whitmore watched her climb the staircase, slowly while regret settled through him with unbearable weight. Somewhere deep inside himself, he understood this moment had nothing to do with business success or social redemption. It was about witnessing the woman he once underestimated become extraordinary without him. Naomi reached the podium beneath the enormous chandelier where years earlier her marriage had quietly died in front of Manhattan's elite. The symmetry of it almost felt poetic. She looked out across the ballroom calmly while applause softened into silence. Her eyes moved briefly across familiar faces before landing on Ethan for only 1 second. Then she began speaking. 3 years ago, Naomi said softly, I believed losing everything meant the end of my story. The ballroom became perfectly still. I thought heartbreak would destroy me. I thought humiliation would define me. And for a while, I allowed myself to believe that being abandoned meant being unworthy. Ethan lowered his eyes slowly. Naomi continued with quiet grace. But pain has a way of revealing truths success often hides. It teaches you who truly sees you, who values you, and most importantly, whether you are brave enough to see value in yourself after someone else fails to. Several guests exchanged emotional glances while the orchestra remained silent beneath the stage lights. Naomi's crimson gown shimmered gently as she rested both hands against the podium. The most powerful thing a woman can do is rebuild her life without bitterness, she said. Not because the people who hurt her deserve forgiveness, but because she deserves peace. Ethan felt every word like confession. Naomi's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Some people will try to erase you, she continued quietly. Some will replace you publicly and expect your silence to become your shame. But survival has a beautiful way of transforming women. And sometimes the ending you cried over becomes the beginning that saves you. A woman near the front table wiped tears from her eyes discreetly. Naomi inhaled slowly before speaking the final words that would remain quoted across magazines and social media for years afterward. You did not destroy me, she said calmly. You introduced me to the woman I was always meant to become. The ballroom rose into a standing ovation so immediate and overwhelming that even the orchestra members stood applauding beside their instruments. Crystal light reflected across tearful eyes, lifted champagne glasses, and thunderous admiration filling every corner of the room. Ethan remained frozen in place watching Naomi beneath the chandeliers, while realization finally settled completely inside him. He had spent years building empires, controlling headlines, and mastering negotiations. Yet the strongest person he had ever known was the woman he once dismissed publicly in front of this very room. Naomi accepted the award gracefully before stepping away from the podium. As applause continued echoing through the ballroom, she descended the staircase slowly and walked toward the grand exit alone. Ethan instinctively took 1 step forward as though part of him still believed he could stop her this time. But Naomi never looked back. Outside, Manhattan glittered beneath midnight skies while flashes from photographers illuminated the entrance like stars bursting against darkness. Naomi paused briefly beneath the gold hotel lights and smiled softly to herself before stepping into the waiting car. Not as someone's abandoned wife, not as someone's social accessory, but as Naomi Carter, entirely her own.